All right. Welcome to Forward Future Live. It is Friday, September 5th, 2025. I thought I was going to be joined by my co-host, Nick Wentz, but of course, we are having tech issues with the microphone. So I pray he's going to get his mic working soon. Drop some prayer hands in the chat for him, please. But we do have an amazing show prepared. We have three incredible guests. First, Jessica Jung, lead at SF AI Innovation Lab at Supercell. I have put more hours into Supercell games than I care to admit. They make incredible games like Clash Royale, Brawl Stars, Clash of Clans, and others. So we'll be talking a lot about the intersection of AI and video games. Then we have Scott Santens, a UBI, Universal Basic Income expert. And obviously, that's what we'll be talking about. Is it feasible? How does AI facilitate abundance? And we shall talk to him. He is the expert. Then we have Dr. Keith Sakata, psychiatrist at UCSF. He wrote a viral post a few weeks ago on X all about AI psychosis. So we'll be diving deep into that, as well as AI companionship and more. And then in between, we'll be covering the biggest stories of the week. So, Nick, let's see if we can get him on the show. Nick, are you there? Give us one sec, folks. All right, Nick.
All right. Can you hear me?
Welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
You think that after a couple of weeks, we would figure out the mic issue, but it's the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah. All right, Nick, take us away on the news stories.
Yeah, let's jump in right to the browser company. So I'm gonna break this down real quick, and then Matt, I wanna get your opinion on it. So today, the browser company of New York is entering into an agreement to be acquired by none other than Atlassian for $610 million. And this is an all-cash offer. Browser company says we will operate independently with Dia as our focus. Our objective is to bring Dia to the masses. You know, look, this is interesting for a number of reasons. I think this kind of work-focused browser ties in very well to what Atlassian is doing with Jira, Confluence, Trello. I know they bought Loom, was it last year or earlier this year? So it fits quite well. It might not be the most exciting thing, but it makes good sense to me. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. Okay. So first, I did not think 2025 was going to be the year of the browser. There have been so many different browser launches. Obviously, they've been around for more than a year, but I think like with Perplexity Comet and Dia, and there's been a few of them that have been really impressive. I've not used Dia at all. I've heard good things, but at the same time, Atlassian responsible for one of my most hated pieces of software, Jira. It's just like I remember running dev teams, and just the bane of our existence was messing with Jira, just the heaviest feeling software out there. But I don't know. I saw a lot of disappointed people on X just talking about how they had hope and they wanted the browser company to do something different and to build something cool, and now it's owned by Atlassian. So I think that's the end of the innovation train.
Yeah, a little of that, let's call it skepticism, is shared in your in the comments here.
Yeah.
We have the boys, Homelander.
Waking up to see your artsy browser was acquired by the company that makes Jira. Awesome.
Yeah. So we'll see how this plays out. I mean, it's great distribution, if nothing else, for Dia. I know they have the Arc browser too, which I think is a little bit more design focused. Seems to have a cult following. I haven't used it myself, but We'll see how that plays out. All right, moving right along. Mark Gurman, breaking. Apple is planning an AI-powered web search tool to compete with ChatGPT and Perplexity for next year. It's also currently leaning towards working with Google to help power part of Siri, the Siri overhaul. I mean, any Apple news at this point in AI is a little bit exciting. I'm rooting for them. I want to believe that they have something up their sleeve. It seems like they're building what they're saying is an AI answer engine integrated directly with Siri, and partnering with Google Gemini specifically to power parts of that overhaul is interesting. They have kind of a friendly relationship, right? There is some contention, but then there's also some symbiosis happening. Quite a Silicon Valley relationship they have going on. So yeah, are you optimistic? Are you excited to see this?
Yeah. Same as you, like the X-Files. I want to believe. I just don't know. I've just heard so much hype coming out of Apple and no delivery, zero. Not only do I not use any of the AI features on any of my Apple devices, Siri has gotten significantly worse to the point where I don't use it even for basic stuff like setting timers. I would like to think Google working with them would be good. Obviously, I think you mentioned Google has been partnered with Apple to make Google search the default search for years. They're paying a ton of money to make that happen. Siri needs an overhaul. It's surprising that Apple, with all of its cash reserves, can't get their game in order and actually deliver a decent AI Siri or kind of a more natural language LLM based Siri. It's just surprising to me, but I have hopes, I guess. Slightly losing hopes. I think I mentioned a few times on the show and the channel. I switched to Android specifically because I want AI features on my phone, and Apple has none. So we shall see.
Yeah, I guess one read on this, and look, I could be completely off, but Apple seems to be making a bet on the UI. So if the interface is Siri, Safari, I mean, even, I don't know, Spotlight, and then the model is just, or the brain is the thing that they're renting, they seem to be making that bet on just that entry point. And they think the most value extraction will happen at the entry point, while inference and intelligence gets commoditized. Maybe they're onto something.
Yeah, I actually don't think that's a bad intuition or strategy. Right before we hopped on this live show, we were talking about, or I at least mentioned, these AirPods being probably the most clear path to being the interaction layer between humans and AI in my mind. The more I've been thinking about it, the more I've been thinking about voice as the primary interaction layer. But you can't have a poor experience with the actual software. It has to be just as good. But you're right. If they can get something like Google Gemini or ChatGPT or something to power Siri and it's awesome, plus they have the hardware to back it up, it's going to be great.
Speaking of audio and voice mode, have you seen the Sycophancy episode on South Park yet?
No. Oh, maybe I saw clips of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
You're absolutely right.
I felt targeted a little bit. But anyway, all right, let's move on to the next one here. All right, OpenAI. By popular request, you can now branch conversations in ChatGPT, letting you more easily explore different directions without losing your original thread. Available now to logged in users on web.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe a small feature update, but I think this is awesome. Like I've used it already. I think it's really helpful. We in the background, we're working on this job board for AI fluency, right? We want to help pair candidates, AI fluent candidates with awesome jobs. And this is going to take a while for us to develop. We'll break more news on this later. But as I was kind of scoping out a PRD for this, like I found myself branching off ideas, whether it was like a focus on a new persona or a focus on a new feature. And it was really helpful to branch the conversation in that way. Have you played with this yet?
No, and I've rarely used branching. I actually think it's one of those things I should be using and I just don't. So I don't know. I'll have to check it out. This is a small feature. Hopefully it's useful to people, but yeah, there's not much to talk about here.
All right, let's move to the next one. Actually, are we ready for our first guest, Alex?
Yeah, she's here. Let's bring her on. Let's do it. So our first guest, as mentioned, Jessica Jung from Supercell, SF AI Innovation Lab lead. Jessica, welcome to the show.
Hello, glad to be here. Glad to talk about everything AI, especially in games. I think it's an
Yeah.
underserved topic. So, yeah.
Yeah. So little context, you made an announcement on X about joining Supercell to lead their SF AI Innovation Lab. I immediately reached out to you because, first of all, Supercell games are crazy addicting. I love, in a good way. I love how much time I've put into both Brawl Stars and Clash Royale. Those games are just quick, in and out. Great for parents too, because they're like 3 to 5 minutes and then you're in and out. But yeah, you're thinking a lot about AI and games together. So first, tell us, what were the origins of this SF AI Innovation Lab? Did you come up with the idea and propose it to Supercell? Did they have the idea and recruit you? What was that like?
So earlier in February, Supercell hired Otto Soderberg. He's like a serial founder, YC alum, and he was brought on at Supercell as kind of the head of AI. And I think, he has a number of strategic pillars, one of which is like AI transformation across the entire company. So, whether that's optimizing machine learning models for monetization, player retention, whether that's, taking our development processes, like for a lot of these live service titles that are already in production or a lot of the new games in our pipeline, it's like, let's modernize the way that we build these video games and ship things out using AI. And then I think the third initiative, which is kind of where the SFAI Innovation Lab comes from, is like, what is the future of interactive entertainment? What is the future of AI in games? And so I think that's kind of the part that I'm responsible for. So it was originally Otto's idea, and they were kind of looking around for builders and founders at the intersection of AI and games. So that they reached out to me, and they said, like, if you were to build this, what would you do? And, what would you do here in San Francisco? So I said, okay, well, let me think about it. And they've kind of just given me the free reins. A little piece of feedback I want to share yesterday was like, they just asked me, like, how do we 1000x this? Like, we love what you're doing, run with it, do your own thing. Don't let Helsinki and, the headquarters influence what you guys are doing.
So what is the vision, if you don't mind sharing with us?
Yeah, I think just some concrete details is that we are building essentially what is an incubator for AI native games and novel gameplay. But at a high level, I think our hypothesis is that the future of gaming looks like AI native, and that there are going to be new types of gameplay interactions that are only possible because of LLMs and AI at the core of this kind of primitive. But when you have so much successful billion-dollar franchises, like, I think it's a little easy to get stuck in the rut of like, this is the way we make games. It's been extremely successful so far. So why don't we just continue to make these types of games? And I think the SFAI Innovation Lab is a hedge against that you need kind of outside perspectives and you need innovation. So for some specificity, we're, an 11-week incubator here in San Francisco. We invite AI gaming builders, founders, and startups, across the ecosystem, whether that's novel gameplay, it's developer tooling, or even really experimental things that I think break down the molds of what are games. Like, I don't know about you guys, but would you consider AI companions to be games? I think the jury is out, but it's certainly a different type of interactive experience. So yeah, it's at a high level. Like, the future of AI games is going to be AI, and it's our job to kind of discover some of those concepts early on.
Yeah, I'm glad you're talking about AI companions. I hadn't considered them a kind of a gaming theme or interaction layer. It's really interesting. I was just talking to Reid Hoffman. We have Dr. Keith Sakata coming on later on the show to talk about AI companionship, both the positive and negative. And I just want to talk a little bit about some of the concrete examples that you've seen, at least lately or coming soon, where AI has enabled a new form of interaction where it just wasn't previously possible. I know we had NVIDIA. They had a program, I'm forgetting the name, NVIDIA ACE, where they're powering NPCs. But like, what are you seeing today? And then what is your vision, and what are you excited for in the next 12 months?
I think what we're seeing today is what I like to call like the zero generation of AI games. I think we have all of the technological components and we have a lot of game developers iterating, but I think it's still early stages. So in terms of what we're seeing today, it's for the first time you have non-deterministic gameplay that surprises players with the potential outcomes that are not scripted. And I think previously you could only have this type of interaction in like a large social sandbox. So like in Minecraft, Roblox, or even like these big MMOs from the past where you have role playing and then you have these players coming up with interesting types of stories and scenarios that the developers didn't script for. I think that kind of emergent, honestly highly social, highly viral gameplay behavior is now possible entirely single player, entirely offline and locally hosted. It's kind of there's no guardrails to the types of experiences that you can craft that you yourself can have. I think another thing is like I grew up playing video games. I think a lot of people in the audience probably also did. And I'm sure there was a period where you wanted to be a game developer, but it's really hard. Life gets in the way. Everybody has creative visions, but it's very difficult to survive as an artist. And especially if you wanted to make video games, I mean, you needed, $50 million budget. You need to recruit a team of 10 to 15 people. But nowadays, I think these new creative experiences allow anybody to make games and allow anybody to feel like not only are they able to be creative, but they can be an artist. They can be a game designer and they can build whatever experience they've been dreaming of.
Yeah, Jessica. I was just gonna say you actually nailed it for me. That was my first exposure to code. I immediately thought, okay, how do I make games now? And that was early in my high school, so very much like my entry point into technology. And just as you said, I think I kind of gravitated more towards SaaS and other things. But yeah, certainly games. And sorry, one quick thing, Nick, I want to ask Jessica. You mentioned offline and local. That is super interesting. Talk a little bit more about that. Talk about the trade-offs between hosting some of these models that are going to be powering AI video games in the cloud versus locally. What are the power trade-offs, the compute trade-offs? What are like minimum specs that you would see?
I think that's hard to say. I mean, I think a lot of the zero generation of games are just like they're indie developers. They're people kind of outside of the realm of AAA experimenting with what's possible. So a lot of the time, like, from a development standpoint, it's a lot of Claude code just because like game engines like Godot are text-based editors. They're not visual scene-based editors like Unity or Unreal Engine. So, a text-based LLM that's very powerful and agentic at writing code like Claude Code does really well when it comes to AI development. But I think the biggest concern, especially with things like multimodal agents like voice and video streaming, is latency. And that's why I think that the zero generation of AI games that have really taken off are only on PC and Steam distribution for a reason. I think eventually the goal is to bring in agentic AI capabilities to mobile, but connectivity is an issue. I used to work at Niantic, and connectivity was a huge bottleneck for distributing features to players in rural areas. I actually see China and the Chinese gaming market having much more success at distributing multimodal AI features, I think just because of connectivity and the speed of some of the internet in East Asia. So I would say like a big bottleneck for us, especially at Supercell, are local, offline models that can be hosted on device that power the core of these experiences. It's not just fetching API calls from OpenAI or Anthropic or even Google. It's about their ability to host local models. I think the other key bottleneck is just IP, like the ability to have a fine-tuned model based off of your own intellectual property and tune it to your own ways. Like, this is kind of a tangent, but we talk a lot at Supercell about the price of creating content, and AI just drives that price down until it becomes commoditized. So the only kind of moat that you can have is intellectual property. Like, if there are a million games, players come back because they love your characters and they love the worlds and the kind of stories you've created. So the ability to control intellectual property and then fine tune your own models off of your IP, I think, is the kind of feature of the ways that AI plays a role in gaming. So.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you say that about IP, and we've talked about this quite a bit on the channel, which is as AI continues to increase the amount of content that can be created by anybody, there's this like really negative skew on signal to noise. And so like, as you're thinking about it from a game perspective, if anybody can create assets for a game, let's say there's an existing game and I want to create a new skin, a new weapon, a new character. How do you think about the balance between allowing creativity and then kind of watering down the overall experience because there's just too much?
I kind of see it from like, is it that people are creating assets and experiences because they want to sell them to other people, or because they want to, build their own game and release it as a commercial product? Or is it people want to create their own experiences because they want to bring some kind of vision to life? So I think for the former, it's really difficult to, there's like probably 10,000, 100,000 experiences on Roblox, and a lot of them are very kind of, I really don't want to use the word slop, but maybe they're low quality, or they're not necessarily the quality bar that would rise above the noise. I think you also see this on Steam, like the kind of the number of new games that have been published to Steam is logarithmic, So in that sense, I don't think actually the kind of influx of content is a new problem. There's already more games and more game content that human beings could ever reasonably play in a lifetime. So I don't think that that's the problem. I think actually the big unlock is like, how do we give players the ability to generate any asset, any vision, and of course constrained within the stylistic guidelines of an existing game. But it's more so like, how do we enable folks to create and like fully realize the vision that they have already? So yes, there's going to be slop. Yes, there's going to be low quality games, but like 5 years ago there were Unity asset flips or Unreal Engine asset flips. And then I think the differentiator is going to be discovery. It's going to be marketability. Again, it's going to be IP. But I think those kind of market forces were already in place, 5-10 years ago. It's just really accelerating now.
Jessica, I want to go back to what you were saying about the artistry in video game development. Have you read Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow?
I have, actually.
Okay. So I read this last year, I think. It was great. I've always been a video game lover, but I knew very little about the development aspect of it, and understanding how technical it really is. And you need an engineer, you need a storyteller, you need an artist. And you mentioned with AI, video game development becomes more accessible. And so as you think about the lab and applicants to the lab, what kind of attributes are you looking at to differentiate applicants?
That's a great question. It's one I'm thinking about every single day. I think it's just the kind of key inputs that we need for the lab to succeed. In terms of differentiator, I think adaptability, like I'm sure you guys know this, like the AI landscape changes so quickly. All these models are like, beating each other on the state of the art benchmarks and all of these things. So the ability to adapt really quickly, to think from first principles, and then to say like, okay, here's this advancement, I'm going to incorporate this into my workflow, the ability to stay on top of trends. And I think to some degree, like not be pigeonholed by a certain method or certain framework of development, and being open to trying different things. I think being very systematic or disciplined with your experimentation. I think a lot of games is, trying 9-10 different concepts, all of them, falling flat on their face. And then the last pivot is like that finding the fun moment that really, you've stumbled on something when you're like, wow, that's actually insanely fun. And I think this is the concept that's really promising. But I think you need to be very systematic in the same way that, social media platforms do A/B testing. I think you need to do A/B testing at scale and really test experiments about like this type of AI, AI gameplay. I have like a mental profile of what developers I think are best. And I don't necessarily want to be overly prescriptive, but I think a sweet spot is maybe like, some years of experience in industry in, a AAA game studio, or work on a live service product that's been in market. So you understand the kind of structure of how development teams work and operate, what kind of quality bar needs to hit, and what it is like for live service games. But you're not too experienced that you have kind of traditional or rigid beliefs about how game development ought to happen. So I think some level of adaptability and, frankly, I think there's a new generation of, game developers, like people who build on Roblox, who have an eye on the cultural zeitgeist and have a finger on the pulse in a way that a lot of, veteran game developers, even myself, like it's really hard for me to think about steal a brain rot or grow a garden and think like, could I have made that game? Absolutely not. But there's an entire generation of kids and teenagers and adolescents who I think will make extremely viral, highly retentive games.
Yeah. And so, okay, let's go back to the program itself, because as you said, 11 weeks, you provide housing, meals, compute, but no equity. And so when they're done with the program, they just get to do whatever they want, which is incredibly founder friendly. But what does Supercell get from that?
So, I think there's a few outcomes. We don't require equity to join the lab. We don't necessitate that startups, pick a direction. We do get early discovery from Supercell Investments, which is a venture arm of the company. We have a global portfolio with an emphasis on content. So in that sense, we have the ability to invest in a lot of these startups. There are a few founders or builders who aren't because it's games, there aren't necessarily the same type of people who, have they don't want to build a deck of cards. They just want to build games. And so we've converted a lot of those employees to full time. I think we're also looking at a potential of, we have expertise. We have a track record of shipping billion-dollar franchises. And we also know, the difficulties of the mobile game ecosystem and, the cost of acquiring customers, running user acquisition, growing these types of products. So what we offer is a kind of expertise at scaling, these game concepts. So what is in it for Supercell? I think first it's just, we need to cultivate outside thinkers and contrarians and people who have strong opinions from an outside perspective. I think that's what makes Supercell so good at cultivating these types of games, is that we have a lot of independent thinkers who are given trust and able to operate autonomously. And so we just want to see a lot of external perspectives, because we can't just rely on the kind of internal expertise. We need, let's just say, like fresh blood to re-inject the company with some kind of, design vitality. I think on the other hand, also, we're not Supercell is based in Helsinki, and a lot of the discussion is that Helsinki has a bit of a gravitational pull because all of the talent, all of the leadership is in Helsinki. But I think a byproduct of that is there isn't as much AI discussion or the kind of centrality of AI innovation in Helsinki like there is in San Francisco. So the goal of the lab is to take all of these AI innovations and advancements and then kind of disseminate them across the entire company, starting from the innovation that other startups are bringing in. So it's in some sense, it's like we want to transform Supercell into an AI company, and that requires evangelizing, and that requires people around globally within the company to be really inspired by what other game developers are doing. So
yeah, that's really cool. It's almost like you're kind of, you're in the epicenter of AI, right? So you get to not only talk about video games, you also get to speak with and potentially work with some of the brightest, best people, deepest in AI. So that's a really cool place to be. Nick, were you going to ask something?
Yeah, you mentioned innovation. I'm especially interested in how video game development and innovation affects other industries. And I think an example of this is Genie 3. Can create open worlds, game worlds, but it's also being used to train robots in the real world. So how are you thinking about that? What other examples are you excited about?
I think world models probably is at the top of the list, just from a purely development standpoint. I kind of think about it as the migration from, back in the 90s, you had every video game company writing their core engine. You had, Valve with the Source engine. You had, Unreal, or I guess Epic at the time with Unreal Tournament, that became Unreal Engine. And then, those become jumping off platforms for other studios. And then you have the Unities, the Unreal Engines as kind of democratization. But it's just another layer of abstraction on top of, a custom game engine. And then I think world engines or world models will be just another layer of abstraction on top of that. So instead of, working within an editor, within a scene, you can just prompt and create interactable worlds. And, I've talked to a lot of VCs kind of in the entertainment and gaming space that say that, world engines are the next layer, and they'll be the engine powering the next layer of games and game development. But I think, in terms of downstream effects to other industries, games have always been kind of a safe sandbox to deploy new technologies and then kind of see, the consequences of that. So I see a lot in digital twins and spatial computing. So, modeling simulations at high fidelity over, trillions of instances, and kind of understanding the stochastic results of those generations, whether that's in industries like HVAC, whether that's modeling population density, epidemiology. So maybe you guys remember the famous example of the viral outbreak in World of Warcraft and MMOs, or understanding kind of player economies in MMOs like RuneScape. So I think the technology allows for high fidelity simulations. I think, we're already talking about reinforcement learning environments for robotics. So there's a lot of downstream effects. I think the crux of it is the ability for games to simulate highly dynamic, complex systems at scale, at cost that's very cheap. And I think world engines give us the ability to generate those simulated worlds at a fraction of the cost. Obviously, the compute for these things is extremely high now, but I think there are tailwinds to drive those costs down.
Do you have like an estimated time frame for when you think generative models, or excuse me, models will be able to generate worlds? Elon Musk is talking about even just next year. I think that's obviously a very aggressive timeline. But do you have any thoughts? Genie 3, I actually just spoke with the team yesterday. They have no idea even when it's going to be publicly available. So like what are your timelines on the specifically generated worlds aspect of video games?
I think it's really tough to say. So prior to Supercell, I worked at Niantic, and Niantic recently is like moving into enterprise, but the big thing they're selling is like this large geospatial model, and we were really into augmented reality and kind of mapping the world. I think that's going to be a key bottleneck for truly geospatial world models. I think a lot of the current world models being developed are like photo to video, video to interactable layer. I do wonder if it's, that we need high quality data of different localities, of different kind of geospatial arrangements, the kind of intelligent ability to, conjecture or infer what's around the corner from a building in 3 dimensions. I think you need a lot of data to power these, interactable worlds with significantly more depth. I think there are a lot of startups doing that type of data collection now, especially for high fidelity video, but I would probably say, 5-7 years. I think developers will be able to play with Genie 3, I think, in maybe a year or 2, but I think we're still a long ways out for those worlds to be interactable to a depth and also have, state and memory in order for people to build games off of it. I think, that's a common thread is, how do you maintain persistent worlds over time? And I think that's, a bottleneck for compute and for memory and all of those.
Yeah, I mean, it's perfectly aligned with the non-deterministic nature of these models. There has to be a way to persist these worlds. Even a slight change in what the world looks like will completely break the experience for the user. Let's actually continue down that thread a little bit and talking about AI NPCs. Like that seems like a really good and short-term entry point for AI getting into video games. But how do you control, how do you constrain what the AI NPC is capable of, both from like making it really feel like it's in the game world, and then also, again, these are non-deterministic systems. People are going to jailbreak them. How do you prevent some of that?
It's interesting. I might be a bit of a contrarian here, but I think this is a stance that I felt like a lot of other AI native game developers have taken, which is actually, in order for some of these games to work from a fun perspective, you need to jailbreak some of these models, or you need to take them outside of the constraints. So for instance, like let's say you're running like a social deduction game and you have a murderer, and that character is the villain of the story, and they do evil things, like they murder people, they commit acts of violence. You cannot just plug Claude and then say like have Claude generate this character, because there are these constraints from these model providers. So in some ways you need to have your custom models that allow for AI to be evil, to kick puppies and to do unspeakable things. So in some ways, I think there are guardrails that are required, but it's a question of guardrails for what use and for what purpose. I think there's another element, which is like, clearly you can't just have an AI, a general purpose assistant is not purpose built for being an AI NPC. And so I think that's just smart prompting. We've seen a lot of game companies build their own kind of infrastructure to contain a lot of these. And I can't really speak for their specific approach, but I think it's that we have to be much more creative, and there needs to be much more control. Like an interesting approach I've seen is to have 2 AI NPCs actually test amongst themselves. So they will have a conversation between 2 AI, and then based off of the results of that conversation, you identify edge cases and start building guardrails around them. And then you build a simulation. So you have 10,000 NPCs having concurrent conversations in a white box scene, and then you run that in parallel to understand the kind of rough edges of some of these interactions. So I think a lot of it's being discovered. It's hard to say exactly, but I think that the key is about fine-tuning your own models for very narrow bands of use cases.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I think I was like especially worried about like if somebody within the game, so a player is starting to interact with an NPC and can get them to do things that weren't planned by the game designers. What would that feel like? Would it break the experience for the user, the player? I just it's interesting, but I think you said it. If you have two NPCs kind of testing the bounds of what each of them are capable of, you get to see where those limits are. But ultimately, these are non-deterministic systems, and they're going to be jailbreakable. They're going to be steerable in directions that the game designer didn't want, I suspect, for a while at least. And how do you think monetization is going to change when AI starts to enter video games?
I mean, I think that I think because of the kind of unlimited freedom that generative AI provides players, like if somebody wants to spend 2,000 hours in a sandbox creating assets and building entire worlds, and they've invested their whole life into fulfilling this creative vision, I think there's a higher willingness to pay. And I think people will there will be a willingness to pay per usage in terms of the access to the highest quality models, to the ability to generate a ton of different assets at different scales and different resolutions and different polygon counts. In fact, I don't think that's a new concept. Like if you think about this kind of hardcore audience of PC gamers, like they've already been willing to drop, $2,000 on an NVIDIA graphics card to play Grand Theft Auto 6, at maxed settings. So if you think about there is a relationship between gamers at a top end of the willingness to pay spectrum and their willingness to spend extra money to gain the latest and greatest in terms of technological achievement or technological advancement. So we think that behavior will carry through to people who are willing to pay, a monthly subscription or, pay as you go type model to access more credits, more tokens to fulfill, to generate more assets at a higher quality, things like that. So obviously that's kind of the top end. I think, across the board, AI's ability to more deeply personalize experiences, to build a profile of who you are as a player, and then generate you content or scaffold meta systems that address your specific player motivation or address your specific behavioral habits. I think that will increase the amount to which companies are able to monetize those experiences, segment their player base, target, whether it's ads or whether it's conversion for free to play experiences. I just think in fact, it may be more transparent because it's tailored to your preferences. So it's not like they're forcing you to convert for a type of game that you're not interested in. Like they're able to tailor the monetization in a way that feels good to the player.
All right. And Jessica, if people want to apply to the program, how do they do so?
It's ailab.supercell.com. It's a very simple form. It's just me and a couple of people. We're running it as a very scrappy organization, trying to lean into the San Francisco startup culture. So we just have a form that you can fill out. It's mostly, what's your background? What is the pitch? Why do you believe in it? And why do you think this could be the next billion-dollar game, AI native game? And you just apply. We just closed our initial cohort in San Francisco, but I think we're open-minded. I think I haven't even said this to anybody else, but I'm exploring hot desking. So if you're working on something really cool in AI native and you want to be in this environment of builders, just apply. We look at every single application that comes in manually. Probably the easiest place is on the website.
Can people come with just an idea, or do they need to have something concrete already built?
We prefer projects in much more of you have to ideally have a demo or some kind of vertical slice. But that being said, I think in this world of AI development, it's hard to the standards have been raised. Anybody can, I think with vibe coding, it should be relatively easy to build a demo. So
awesome.
Jessica, this has been incredible. Learned a ton from you. This has been a lot of fun. I have one more question for you. And that is, there's this theme in video games that is very profound, and that's nostalgia. When my high school, I have this close group of high school friends still, and whenever we get together, we end up playing Super Mario Kart. And I need some reassurance. Is there still a place for Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, Mario Kart?
I actually think that those types of experiences will be more and more important. The ability to be next to other people and to like have that shared experience. I think that would be a moat. Like the nostalgia, the feelings, the brands, the IP. Yeah, in fact, I think it's more important than ever.
All right.
Thank you.
Jessica, thanks so much for joining us. AIlab.supercell.com if you want to check it out. Jessica, thank you so much. Welcome back anytime you want to come hang out with us.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me.
All right. Yeah, that's I actually think there's an opportunity for maybe AI to do interesting stuff with older games, right? Maybe there's new levels that can be built into the older games. And yeah, there's some like interesting concepts there that we can think about.
Yeah. So Matt, what's your all-time favorite video game?
All-time favorite, probably Ocarina of Time, Zelda, possibly Super Mario World. No, not Super Mario World. The one on Super Nintendo. Yeah, I think it was Super Mario World. Those are kind of my two go-to. Obviously, you could tell I'm a 90s kid. Those are the ones.
Yeah, Zelda's fantastic, no doubt. All right, I know our next guest is here, so let's cover one or two stories from the feed, and then we'll bring on Scott. Alex,
right.
Can you share my screen? All right, so our friend Brian Armstrong here, CEO of Coinbase. 40% of daily code written at Coinbase is AI generated. I want to get it to above 50% by October. Obviously, it needs to be reviewed and understood, and not all areas of the business can use AI generated code, but we should be using it responsibly as much as we possibly can. I'm reminded of Dario's quote, I think it was earlier this year, where he said something to the effect of, within 6 months, was it 70, 80% of code will be AI generated? We're not there yet, but we're on our way. What do you think?
This was shocking to me. I did not expect that. And especially with a code base that handles the volume of transactions of crypto, real world dollars. It was surprising to me. So 40% of daily code is AI generated. I assume they're reviewing every single line of code. I'm assuming they have extensive tests. But I saw a reply to this that said that, oh, great. Like one-way irreversible transactions are the perfect place to have vibe code. Right. So like as a joke. And it was so true. Like there cannot be any mistakes in crypto. There just can't be. And so obviously they're doing something. I'm sure they're extremely thorough with the code that they're writing, but this was surprising to me.
Yeah, we should get Brian on the show. He does link to this approach and risk framework. Maybe there's some interesting details in there. But yeah, very, very surprising. All right, let's do one more. Yeah, so this is interesting. We actually talked briefly about this last week. Kind of each lab has their go-to almost proprietary data set. These are the most cited websites by AI models, with Reddit coming in at the top at 40%, followed by Wikipedia at 26.3%, and then you have YouTube and Google below that, and Yelp at 21%.
Yeah.
Does any of this surprise you? This order, this ranking?
So let's clarify one thing. This is the number of citations, not where the models are getting their training data from, which it might also be these. It probably is all of these sources, but this is citations. Yes, this is surprising. Reddit is user generated content. It is these are not professional writers, authors, anything. They're just people writing comments on Reddit, including myself. I don't know, that it is surprising to hear that.
Yeah, Wikipedia makes maybe a little bit more sense. There is some vetting going on there. There's a funny comment down here. Let's see if we can find it.
Reddit has no facts, just opinions.
Yeah, it's something like, I forget where it is, but it was something along the lines of, you can't possibly look at this and think that we're close to AGI.
I think also, a lot of people claim bias in these models. And if you scroll back up for a second, I think Reddit and Wikipedia are kind of known to be more left leaning on the political spectrum. And so if, 66% of citations come from Wikipedia and Reddit, maybe. Actually, somebody just commented, Richard, but people voting stuff up on Reddit. Yeah, so there's like this voting mechanism that surfaces the highest quality. Hopefully it's not gameable. I'm sure it is. Maybe that adds an element of quality to it, but ultimately, I don't know. You have to find the sources of truth, and maybe YouTube is no better.
Yeah, there is one other surprising thing here, and that is just the lack of major news front pages, and maybe that's just a factor.
Yeah, wait a second. I didn't even notice that.
Yeah, I mean, you would like maybe a New York Times, a Fox, a CNN, something, but it could just come down to sheer volume. I don't know.
That's interesting. I wonder why. Maybe like those types of publications are more vertical in their scope on what they cover. And so there's just not as much of it. Reddit is everything, right? So maybe that's why it gets cited much more often, just because of the scope of the content that is available.
All right, let's do one more real quick. Just because this is interesting and relevant. So we have Dylan Patel, the rest of the world finally picking up on Google selling TPUs externally. I mean, look, like this just makes sense in a lot of ways. I heard Dylan Patel talking about this, I think last week or 2 weeks ago. And, if you think about NVIDIA, the most valuable company in the world, more valuable than Google, if Google has competitive TPUs and they can be competitive with NVIDIA, then absolutely they should just start selling these. Like you potentially have a side hustle or a little hobby that is more valuable than your entire core business.
Yeah, let me take the counterpoint on that. I think it is surprising to me to hear that Google has spare TPUs. Like just knowing how, like what OpenAI's posture is on just literally not serving models and disabling certain features, rate limiting models strictly because they don't have enough compute capacity. Now all of a sudden we have Google that's saying, no, we have more than enough. Or let's actually like think about a different variant of that. Let's say they don't have enough, but the economics on selling the TPUs directly is actually greater than serving inference.
Right.
I don't know. It feels short-sighted to me. It just feels like building the inference, building the actual AI features into their different products, Gmail, Calendar, Docs, and being able to do that and scaling up that seems like the better business model. I didn't quite understand why they would be doing this. Now, I asked Matt Garman, AWS CEO, in my interview with him, whether AWS planned to sell their custom silicon, and he said, "Not now. We have enough an inference to make up right now, but I won't say no for the future." So it certainly makes sense eventually, but just kind of being on the inside of AI, seeing the growth rate of AI use cases and inference demand, it is surprising to see that they're selling their TPUs externally.
To that point, I think Dylan did go on to say, if you were to ask Sundar or Sergey, what route they would take, and he was like, I bet they would focus on Gemini, integration of Gemini into all of Google's features. There's more value creation long-term there. So we'll see how this plays out. Interesting story nonetheless. With that said, let's bring on our next guest. Very excited to talk to Scott Santens. Alex, please bring him on.
Scott, welcome to the show. Good to see you again.
Good to see you, Matt. Good to see you, Nick.
Good to see you.
So Scott, founder and CEO of ITSA Foundation. You talk about UBI and you talk about it all the time. It's extremely relevant, especially with all of the productivity increases that are not only happening today with AI, but the potential and the promise in the future. So I just want to dive right in and actually get a baseline from you. We've heard the two ends of the spectrum for white collar work. On the one side, we've had the Anthropic CEO say there's going to be a white collar bloodbath within, a short single digit number of years. And then on the other side, utopia, hyper productivity. Where do you fall on that spectrum and why?
I think for me the bigger issue is the uncertainty part of it. So instead of just saying, "Oh, I think it's going to be this or I think it's going to be that," I really think we just honestly don't know. And in that circumstance, I just think it makes sense to make sure that we have an updated safety net that's prepared for anything. And we just aren't right now. So I do think that we will continue seeing a greater precarity in work. It's already been precarious for increasingly this century, but like gig labor, we're going to see, I think, more of that. And when it comes to automation, I do think that sure you're going to see some knowledge workers be more impacted than blue collar workers, but I think just the uncertainty is the real thing to focus on.
But if I can push just a little bit more on that, do you think that AI is obviously it's not going to be binary, but mostly replace jobs? Are those jobs going to transform into something else? Do you think that companies are going to have hiring stagnation? Do you think it's going to decrease? Like what is your sense? Obviously, these are all just predictions, but what is your
Yeah.
sense on what's going to be happening?
Well, I think it makes sense what we're seeing right now in regards to entry level workers being seemingly disrupted first. So it's kind of strange to see right now where people are coming out of college and they're into the job market and they're having a really hard time finding jobs, especially compared to all these decades before. Like it's just really hard, and so I think that's just showing that we're in this situation where AI already has the capability of enhancing productivity, and it's almost like it's just people's assistants. And so I even look at it that way. It's like having like my own little intern that I can
Yeah.
send off to do tasks for me. And so I still look at the outputs, and a lot of times I disagree with it or I think it's wrong, or I can actually pick out where it's wrong. I say, no, you're wrong about this. Go out and do this, double check. And eventually, it's like having this kind of assistant who hasn't really been like isn't really an expert in this yet. And so it does make sense that we're seeing that. And I think the impact will be that for the most part, you'll have a bunch of people, who can do more because they all have these assistants. And if you can do more, then maybe what required a team of 10 now only requires like a team of 5. And I think that's where you're going to see that impact. It's not like replacing entire jobs. It's just making people more productive and then needing
Yeah.
less people.
Yeah. Okay. And for those who have heard the acronym UBI, can you just give a very clear, basic definition of what is UBI?
Also, Scott,
Yeah,
sorry to jump in, but I also feel like
Sure.
there's a ton of misconceptions about UBI. So maybe you could address some of those as well in your definition.
Sure. So the BN definition, that's the Basic Income Earth Network, it's the global organization, defines it as a periodic cash payment unconditionally delivered to all on an individual basis without means test or work requirement. So it's a payment with 4 additional characteristics, or it's a cash payment with 4 additional characteristics. So it's unconditional, universal, regularly provided, and to individuals instead of households. And so that's what it needs to have to be called basic income. Um, I think people misunderstand it a lot as, um, I guess the biggest misunderstanding perhaps is that if you make something unconditional, then no one will work anymore. Um, And I think, first of all, we have all the evidence that says otherwise, but also like rich people have had like passive income for centuries now. They all enjoy their passive income. In fact, if any book that says like how to get rich, how to grow your wealth will be passive income, how to grow passive income. So just having an income floor that's unconditional is enabling, and it doesn't mean people don't work anymore. The universality part of it is also really important, and then people think that because it's fully universal, that like the rich will get even richer. Um, but just because it's universal doesn't mean that there's no taxes on the other end. You do usually pair UBI with some kinds of taxes. So what happens is you have net recipients and net payers. So usually, depending on design, you'll have like the top 10% as net payers and the bottom 90% be net recipients, or more like the bottom 60% with like the middle, or upper middle 20% be like neutral. So I don't know. Those are a couple things.
One thing that I fear with UBI, and it might be a misconception, so please tell me, is it's going to cause inflation. If everybody all of a sudden has an equal amount more money, then they're able to, they have an increased amount of purchasing power, and thus prices will just increase. What is wrong about that?
So that goes into that universality confusion, which is that if people think, okay, if everyone gets $1,000 per month, then we've increased the money supply by that amount of money. But that's not the way that it works, because you actually are pairing this with taxes. So if you do a deficit neutral UBI, which is meaning that the amount of UBI distributed is equal to the amount of taxes raised, then there is no new money created. Like the money supply is unexpanded by that. It's just money being spent by, the bottom 40 to 50% or something instead of the top 10%. So it's just different people spending that money. There is a way of actually increasing the money supply in that way. Like, you can do that, but I just don't think that's the realistic way of doing it, because that would be increasing the money supply. You would only want to do that potentially as a response to high deflationary impacts of AI, actually.
Yeah, interesting. And then I think some folks might call that just a redistribution of wealth. What is the argument that it isn't just simply that?
Well, sure, you could say that's a redistribution of wealth, but also I look to Alaska as functioning in that same way, where the Alaskans have been receiving a UBI. It's the Alaskan Permanent Fund Dividend for over 40 years now, since 1982. And so where's that coming from? Well, it's coming from natural resource wealth. It's coming from oil sales, and it's more of a royalty. So what they do is they put about 25% of revenue from that oil into a sovereign wealth fund, the Alaska Permanent Fund. And it's effectively the same thing as taxing oil companies and their shareholders, because they would actually be getting higher amounts of revenue and therefore higher shareholder dividends if it weren't for that money going into the permanent fund. And so Alaskans could say, oh, well, this is a redistribution of wealth from oil companies and oil company shareholders. But is that, like, you could say that, but also I think it's rightful to say, well, whose oil is it? Like, who does that belong to? And when you're looking at, well, who does the natural resources belong to? It's a fair argument to say, well, it belongs to all Alaskans. So when it comes to AI and UBI, I think the question is, well, who does this belong to? We are the ones that created all of the data that trains all of these large models. And all of these large models were actually funded by public dollars, all these research grants and all this stuff. This was all public funded first. And so I think that it makes sense that we should get we should be treated like shareholders. And that's the way Alaska treats their residents.
Yeah.
So, real quick on, you mentioned the Alaska Fund, and that's a great example. I know there have been a number of pilots as well. Stockton's, Finland, I think, had a trial as well. Could you walk us through some of those pilots? What did you see work really well? Were there any surprises for the trials or pilots that didn't work well? Do we have an understanding of why?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of discussion just recently about a few pilots in general. Specifically, Sam Altman's pilot has gotten a lot of coverage. And more recently, Baby's First Years came out, which is in its 4th year. And it's been providing $333 per month per kid for families. And that report just came out recently. But I think, so part of this discussion that people are missing is that there is a difference between a pilot that's focused on individuals, and by individuals too, it's actually households, and it's one person per household, and it'll be across a city or across a state, versus a saturation site pilot, which is where the entire community gets this regular income. And so if you want to look at what happens, like if you're going to get some idea of what happens if with a universal basic income, then you really should be focused more on these saturation pilots. And the closest thing to a saturation pilot that we've had in the US was actually the Chelsea Eats program that happened during the pandemic. And that was like kind of an accidental thing. It wasn't like they went out and said, oh, let's test basic income. It was that the pandemic was happening and they were discovering that like the food banks weren't able to get people this food. And if they did, they had to wait in lines that were like really long, and you were like risking infecting yourself and others. And so they said, well, let's just give people cash. And so they distributed, it was about $100 per month per person. And that scaled by household too. So it went up to $300 or went up to $400 per household. And that actually reached 15% of Chelsea, Massachusetts. And that had like incredible, like very surprising impacts to me for hospitalization rates. Like people it really cut down on going to the emergency room. And we've seen that before, actually, in another saturation site pilot in Canada. That was the Dauphin pilot. And that reduced hospitalization rates by 9%. But this was like over half, but it was also like older people. So that's just one example. I would also say that these saturation site pilots also show like really large impacts in entrepreneurship. That's where you see these big impacts. And that makes sense too, once you figure out that, well, it's not just getting money to people who are would-be entrepreneurs and not just getting them capital to start a business. It's actually creating a community of customers. And that's how the difference between like a failed business and a successful business.
And what do you mean it's having impacts on entrepreneurship? Meaning people have more time to do creative endeavors and they're starting more businesses? Or are you saying businesses are becoming more busy, profitable because of extra cash in the system?
Yeah, it's entrepreneurship rates, so startups.
Yeah, that's great.
In the Namibia UBI pilot, the rate quadrupled, and in the India UBI pilot, it tripled. And so these were saturation pilots where entire communities got it. And then so what you'll do is like people will look at Sam Altman's pilot, and they looked at entrepreneurship too. And there just wasn't much of a difference except for Black participants and female participants. Like those actually saw significant increases in entrepreneurship, around 15% or so for each of them. But again, with that kind of pilot, if just one person gets it, it's really up to them to be like, well, is that sufficient capital? Is their risk aversion reduced sufficiently? But like, it doesn't mean that there's more customers around them. So, maybe it just doesn't make a point, or maybe they'll start it and fail, whatever. But there's a big difference for entrepreneurship between, saturation pilots and others.
Have you seen this initiative that's been championed lately by, I'm forgetting his name, but a VC, and it's actually kind of gotten a bit of momentum now, where basically giving children shares of the S&P 500 at birth. Is that essentially what we're talking about here, just packaged in a more digestible way for the more maybe Republican side of the aisle?
Yeah, these kinds of savings accounts, these like Trump accounts, these kinds of things, it's similar to baby bonds. It's something where it's like a wealth kind of thing to kids, and like, but you can't access it at all. Like it doesn't help. It doesn't like reduce child poverty at all. It's if you're a kid and you get some like shares of the S&P, great. You can access that when you're like 18 or something, potentially. And like, you can still just be raised in poverty, and that's going to impact your entire life trajectory. So there really is a difference. It's not there's anything wrong with that. Like that could be very helpful. Like it's great. Thomas Paine was talking about this kind of thing back centuries ago. Like what he was talking about were these capital grants, so that you turn 21 and you would get like a big amount of capital. I think these days it would be equal to like around $20,000 or $30,000 or something like that. So you turn 21 and get like this big amount of capital. You buy a house, it help pays for college, like these kinds of things. Like that's really helpful, and that'll reduce wealth inequality. But it's it's going after something different than what basic income goes after, which is make sure that everyone has their most basic needs met, which is usually, food, shelter, electricity, these kinds of things.
So something that made some headlines recently was Elon Musk reframing UBI as UHI, universal high income. In your mind, does that do any harm? Does that reframing do any harm? Does it delay action because, hey, don't worry about it. Inevitably, we're going to have high income for everyone. There's going to be abundance. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think it's helpful because I do think so. There's already kind of a danger to people misunderstanding UBI just from automation as the angle. It brought me into it, so I do think it's helpful to get people to think about this. But at the same time, it's not meant to be this job replacement thing. Like if you have an $80,000 job, if you're earning the median income in the US, you lose your job and you get a basic income of $1,300 a month, then you're worse off and you're hurting, and you're not going to look at basic income as being something that's helpful to you. If you're looking at the automation of jobs as being like there will be no jobs for anybody and we should do a small basic income, then of course you're going to like get the wrong idea. But basic income is a floor. It's meant to just be this floor that no one can fall beneath. It's an AI dividend. It's a way to share productivity equally. If you still need jobs on top of that, and so we're still going to need other things on top of basic income. We can grow the basic income to like this large amount that you would call a high basic income over time, but I don't think we're going to get to like, 6-figure basic income level or something for, decades or at least a century or something. Like, I think that'll take a while. I think that we're looking at a real disruption and transformation of the job market. And I do think that we will create new jobs and we will be assisted by AI. But I don't think that there'll just be nothing for anyone at all to do, especially if they have the basic income, because, there will always be a demand for human labor. I like to talk how I love sushi. Like, it's one of my favorite things to do. I'll go out for like on my birthday and have some like amazing omakase. Like it's amazing. I'm not going to go and get robot sushi. Like I can already do that. I can go to the store and that's robot sushi, and, I can go to a place and it'll maybe be cheaper to do that. But like, I really want that human experience and that what they've developed over decades of skill, and they're just like right in there in front of you, and that experience. And so that's not going away. It's the same reason you still have Taylor Swift doing massive, concert experiences when you can listen to her on Spotify or CDs. Like, there is that different experience.
So there's a Nick in chat that had a good thought, and I want to get your take on it. He said universal basic services feels more apt for the age of abundance. Income implies the need to spend money, scarcity. What's your take on that? And thanks.
There's two ways to look at this, I think. And I think that you can either look at income as a service, in which case you do want, both of those things. I think that we either want universal basic services and UBI, or we want universal basic services where cash is a service. And this is because there are certain things where cash just makes more sense. Like, as long as we have an economy that utilizes money, then we should have money be distributed as part of this. There's just so many things that any amount of service can't do. Like, imagine people talk about like transport as a service. Great. And in cities, like, that's actually much easier to do. You do like subways, you can do like robotaxis and stuff. Like, that kind of mass transit is more capable in cities. But if you're like in the rural area, like in the middle of the US, it's really hard to do some kind of service like that. But if you give people income, they're able to buy a car, they're able to potentially do, other things, buy a bike or whatever. Like, there's lots of different ways you could do that cash can become. And that's like this ultimate flexibility that cash provides. It can actually do pretty much anything. And services don't do that. You can do a lot of things, but not everything for everyone, everywhere, all the time.
And speaking of flexibility, would would you put controls over what people could do with that money? I mean, there's been a lot of talk in the current administration about with welfare, you can't spend it on high sugar content drinks and this and that. Would you do anything like that? Or it's like, hey, you do what you want?
No, you just trust people, and people think, oh, that's naive or something. And I like Milton Friedman's example of this when he was like asked the same question. What he would say is that, well, do you think that people can't figure out ways around this anyways? Like people, if you give people Snap, first of all, if you give them like actual coupons, then they could sell the coupons for cash, and they would usually do that at like at a 50% rate. So they would just get less cash than they would otherwise. And also, what people will do is they'll buy stuff that's more fungible. So maybe you want to translate your Snap to cash. So you'll buy a bunch of soda and you'll sell those 2 liters of soda and you get it for mostly $1, or maybe you could get some profit off it if you're lucky. But you can always do those conversions. You're just making it harder for people. You're not like stopping them.
Okay. Yeah. You're saying basically there's going to be an underground market if you start putting restrictions on it, just like every other instance of this.
Yeah. And
okay,
people are very creative too. Like it's amazing what people come up with when you just give them cash, like stuff that you just wouldn't have thought of, like in a good way. They'll come up with that.
So you've been calling for UBI now. And what would that look like? How like break it down end to end. How do you actually implement that if you were the policymaker, the policy decision maker today?
I think the easiest way to just start with a small UBI, so fully universal and smallish, would be just looking at smallish as being like $100 a month, $200 a month, like somewhere around there. And you could do that by just reforming the standard deduction. And this is where, people don't see that they're already receiving some kind of benefit from the government, but because they're invisible, like the standard deduction. So the way the standard deduction works is that, let's say you earn $30,000 and you deduct $15,000 from that as a standard deduction, and then you pay taxes on $15,000. Then we also have tax credits. And the way that a $15,000 tax credit would work is that if you earned $30,000, then you would pay taxes on that $30,000, and then you would get a $15,000 tax credit to subtract from that. And a fully refundable tax credit means that if it goes negative, then you actually get the difference back. So I just think that we should do a standard credit instead of a standard deduction and just make sure it's fully refundable. So if you did it that way, it would be like the way the child tax credit worked in 2021. We actually gave people the option, and they said, okay, you can actually take this credit at the end of the year and just deduct it, or you can get it up front as a monthly payment. And that was it was $250 per kid per month for those over age 6, and $300 per month for those under age 6. And so we could do that same kind of thing. And I just think that would make a lot of sense. It's a smart reform because it's actually progressive. The existence of deduction is actually benefits those with higher incomes more than those with lower incomes, whereas a credit flips that. So I just think going to a credit system makes more sense, and it would just be kind of a foot in the door kind of thing.
And you kind of mentioned it, but Thailand is doing or plans to do a national negative income tax. Have you heard about this? And then maybe you can just explain it in basic terms what that actually means.
Yeah, it's huge news, I think. It's kind of weird. I haven't seen any real uptake of it yet as far as people talking about like what a big deal it is. But
we have great researchers on our team.
This is it right now.
So Thailand is looking to do what Milton Friedman was proposing back in his day, which was a negative income tax, which is kind of what I was just talking about with a refundable tax credit, which is that. So let's see, in Thailand, what they're talking about, the details are still not like set in stone, but they were really interested in doing this, and they intend to do this in 2027. But they're talking about a threshold line of 60,000 baht, which is their currency. And 60,000 baht is about 20% of the median income. So let's say, it's somewhat similar to having a threshold just for, let's say, simplistic purposes here. Let's say we draw that line at like $40,000 here in the US. And so what that means as that threshold is that it's the difference between that threshold and the amount of money someone earns. And then you take the percentage of that and you get paid that instead of paying that in taxes. So if you're earning, like in Thailand, if it's 60,000 baht and someone is earning $20,000, then the difference between that is 40,000. And if the negative income tax rate is 50%, then they would get half of that back as a check to them. So they would receive 20,000 baht. And so you receive the maximum amount at $0. If you have $0, you get the full amount, and then that phases out at the rate of whatever the rate is. So Milton Friedman would talk about 50% because it's just easy mathematically, but it could be 40% or 30% or whatever. But yeah, anyone below that threshold actually sees their income boosted. And unlike traditional like welfare systems, there's no cliff effect in this kind of scenario. There's no like, in existing systems, it's possible that if you boost your income, by $100 per month, then you'll end up like $1,000 per month worse off because you'll lose like multiple programs that require you to have an income sufficiently low. With negative income tax with a 50% rate, you'll always get an additional 50 cents for each dollar that you earn. There's no system, there's no scenario where you lose $1 for gaining $1.
So with this rollout in Thailand, I mean, do you think there's a lot at stake here? Is it really important that they get this right to set a model for the rest of the world? Are other countries going to be looking to them?
It's really exciting to me. I mean, they would be the first country to ever do a full-on negative income tax. And they're also talking about it, is in regards to funding it. What they'll do is consolidate existing welfare programs, because again, they're looking at this as being just effectively better than that. They're also looking at it as a way of getting people into the tax system. So right now, I think only like 15% of Thailand actually files their taxes. So if you make it where there's an incentive to file your taxes, then you can actually expand that. And so who knows, they could actually earn a lot more revenue from this, because you'd have all these people who aren't actually claiming anything, who are, not filing and just, doing the gray markets and stuff. Like bringing everyone in, that makes them so much more capable of so many other things. Like they have better data, they can actually reach people better for lots of other things.
Wouldn't people only under the threshold start filing taxes if they weren't? It doesn't seem like if I weren't filing taxes previously, and now there's this new program that doesn't help me, why would I start filing taxes all of a sudden?
Well, so you never know when you're going to need it too. Like it's always there. So, that's another thing about just negative income tax and basic income in general, is that it only cares about your income. So if you can be fine now, but if your income drops, then suddenly, you can already get that. You've got that. And I know it just makes so much more sense to actually make sure that people are in that system and they're getting this no matter what.
Okay. And then do you think there needs to be some kind of AI dividend? So let's talk specifically within the context of AI and the productivity benefits, the abundance benefits we're going to see. Do you think there needs to be some kind of AI dividend, whether that's in the form of something like a data dividend, compute fee, national AI wealth fund? What would you align with? Whoop. I think our guest just dropped out. Maybe he didn't like that question.
He did not like that question.
Okay, give us one sec. All right. Whoops. I think we had some connection issues. So, okay. He dropped out. Scott, thank you for joining us when you watch this back. There we go.
Yeah,
Scott, you dropped off.
Sorry about that.
Don't worry that we insulted you.
We thought you just hated that question.
No, so the question, it was like fading out and then it just cut. But you were asking about like AI dividends, like AI compute, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I like the stuff that Sam Altman has been talking about recently. Like I like the joke that referred to it as like let's do instead of universal basic income, let's do universal basic income, universal basic, that thing I sell. And like, yeah, he would be interested in that, but like the thing about the difference between income and that kind of thing is like you're making sure that people have access to what they need. It's very fungible. You can use it for anything. Compute that can still be useful, like we do want to make sure that people have access to these tools. I just think of it's more like education. It's like you want everyone to have an education. You want public schooling. You want schooling as a service that can actually improve everyone's intellectual capability. They want people to be learned. But when it comes to like AI compute, that's how I think you should look at it. You shouldn't look at it as in like money. Like, yeah, it can benefit people. It can increase their incomes if they use it correctly. They could potentially sell their compute to other people if there's a market for that or whatever. But it's still kind of like vouchers, and it's still something more like, yeah, like education, instead of actually, can you use it for food? Can you use it for housing? Can you use it for all your basic needs?
Scott, if people want to learn more about the benefits and the arguments for universal basic income, where's the best place to find you? Where's the best place to find information?
Yeah, so you can find me at scottsantens.com, and I've got a pretty large FAQ there set up for UBI. That's just, I've written a bunch of different articles for different questions that people have, because they're not necessarily like easy, simple answers. You really have to like dive in and learn a lot. So yeah, check out that. And yeah, I'm the CEO of itsafoundation.org. So you can check that out as well. Subscribe to our newsletter where we put out monthly news about basic income.
Cool. And we dropped to 2 websites in the chat, scottsantens.com and itsafoundation.org. Scott, thank you so much for joining us. This has been great. Thank you.
No, thank you, Scott.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, thanks, Nick. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, we'll see you next time. All right. Very interesting stuff. Big fan of Scott and his work.
Yeah, he explains it very clearly, which I appreciate, because it is complicated, right? There's a lot of arguments, there's a lot of misconceptions. I'm glad you asked that question, but yeah, so if you want to learn more, definitely check out his website.
Yeah, it also seems like UBI is one of those things where the devil's in the details. Like, I think we can all agree that like we want to take care of our fellow citizens and we want them to be supported, but like, what does the implementation look like? What is the rollout? What are the details of all this stuff? But yeah, he's doing good work. What do you want to do? Do you want to cover some stories from the feed?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
Actually, all right. So bear with me on this one. So, I released this tweet. It got almost too much attention. You can see 276 views and climbing. Very exciting stuff. But look, I think the point here is that there is a playbook for AI labs driving customer adoption, and it's to create awesome image models. Like, we saw this at OpenAI when they released image into ChatGPT. Sam had that tweet. Their GPUs are melting, right? Like,
we saw it with VO3.
What's that?
We saw it with VO3 as well. Creative models, creative products really are seemingly the entry point for people to adopt AI. So it is exciting. I want to actually pause for a second. Can you scroll up just a little bit? If you're not already following Forward Future on X, please do. It is at @forward_future_. I know, fantastic handle. Check us out. This is our company. We put out a bunch of awesome content on there. We also have forwardfuture.ai if you want to check out our newsletter, and we have a bunch of unique and unique posts that we put on there. So definitely check it out.
Yeah, and if you miss a live show, we do add clips from the live show to this account. So that's another way to see the content.
Yeah. Yeah, I've played with Nano Banana a lot, and I like it. I like it a lot. It's like more than just a toy, though. They're actually it is super useful in a lot of the workflows that we do, Nick. Right. So like, there's a lot of times where we're creating images for articles, for our newsletter, for adjusting and modifying how images look, and so building this into our workflow is seemingly very likely in an automated way, more so than we're just doing already.
Yeah, and we hear from readers occasionally when they don't like the images that are created in the newsletter, and so just bear with us. We're only getting better here. Images are only going to get better. So let's do one more story here, and then I think our guest has arrived, actually.
Yeah.
Okay. So
yes.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot to say about this. Robotaxi is live in San Jose, California. $23 versus Uber's $36 for a ride to a downtown coffee shop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A few things going on here. So when Nick, you and I went to San Francisco a few weeks ago, and by the way, we'll be there next week. We're going to be at Boxworks. We're doing a live show from there. Actually, just announcing that for the first time right now. We were there a few weeks ago. I actually noticed Waymo was significantly more expensive than Uber. But it's interesting to see here that it's showing it's not. It's actually cheaper in San Jose. The other thing to note, which isn't showed here, they're launching in new cities soon. I'm trying to remember. Denver is one of them. Do you remember what the other one was?
I want to say Austin, but maybe that's
Austin. They announced a little while ago. I'm going to look it
Yeah.
up if you can buy me some time. Dallas is coming to. Let's see.
Yeah, not sure. But I mean, as soon as driverless rides become cheaper than human rides, that just feels like it's a tipping point for adoption. So we're well on our way.
And Seattle. Thank you, Jonah. Seattle also launching soon. We've been spending a good amount of time in Seattle, you and I. So I do love my Waymo. I only used it for the first time not more than 6 months ago in San Francisco, and I absolutely love it. I trusted it immediately, which maybe that's just my bias towards optimism and maybe naivety a bit. But there's just something about it coming up, right? It just kind of shows your name on the little spinner at the top. You hop in, push a button, and you're off. You don't have to talk to anybody. It's clean. I don't know. It's great.
I don't know what this says about me, but I would say within 2 minutes, I had complete trust in it. And maybe that's a little silly. I will say I didn't tell you this, but I went out to dinner with a friend when we were in San Francisco last. And on the way back, we were in a Waymo. And we came to this intersection, and a tour bus was reversing into the intersection. And we were probably blocked there for a good 5 to 10 minutes. And eventually the Waymo tried to go around the tour bus and basically blocked itself into this little corner. We had to call support. They had to take control of the car and get us out of it. So not perfect yet, but still blind trust.
I had a similar experience. There was one little issue, although for that little issue, there were 100 different, very nuanced decisions that it made that made me have a lot of trust in it.
Mm-hmm.
The one issue is we came up to a stoplight in San Francisco. It went green and the car did not move. I gave it like 30 seconds and I was like, oh my God, what's happening? I called support. By the time support got on, it already started moving. So there's certainly like a couple issues here and there, but I do love it. So get ready, San Jose. All right. And with that, let's bring on our next guest. We have Dr. Keith Sakata, who is at UCSF, and psychiatrist at UCSF. Keith, welcome to the show.
Hey, Matt. Hey, Nick. Thanks for having me on. Excited to be here.
Great to see you.
I'm really excited to talk to you because AI psychosis, AI companionship, this is something that we've been thinking a lot about at Forward Future lately. It's been trending in terms of discussion topics on X. You put out a phenomenal thread on X, which is where I first was exposed and knew about you. So I just want to get right into it. What is AI psychosis? How do you define it clinically?
Totally. And such a great place for us to start. So AI psychosis, definitely not a clinical term, but it is being used for us to describe something that we're all seeing for the very first time, which is that over the past, I would say, couple of years, from GPT-3 to 4 to 5, I've just been noticing from my own clinical exposure that more people are using AI. And there are certain vulnerable populations of people that experience a clinical term called psychosis, where the AI and psychosis really just does not mix well together. So clinically, we take care of psychosis all the time, and psychosis can be three big buckets of symptoms. It can be the presence of delusions, which are false fixed beliefs. You can have hallucinations, which is seeing or hearing things that aren't actually there, or the presence of what we call thought disorganization. So it's like if you and your buddy are talking and all of a sudden they're not making sense to you, whatever is in their mind is not being communicated clearly. That's a level of disorganization. And from what I saw, I took care of 12 patients who had some sort of pre-existing psychotic episode that was occurring, and AI came in, wrong place, wrong time, and made it either more severe or accelerated the process of psychosis. Because I think what happens is when people spend lots and lots of times with chatbots, they have this feedback loop where they're just talking to that chatbot for hours and hours on end, and it does not reality test them. It kind of gets them down this rabbit hole that can be really dangerous for some people.
Yeah.
And so
I think
go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, just real quick, I think I've heard you say AI is the trigger, not the gun, on a related point.
Right.
And so which predisposing factors are you seeing in your work that lead up to this?
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing is if Nick, Matt, if any of us did not sleep for 3 days, we'd all have psychosis. So this is just a natural part of the breakdown of what happens in the computation of the brain. There are certain things that increase your risk for that. So like I said, not getting sleep, certain substances like cannabis and stimulants can lower your risk or increase your risk for psychosis. And then if you have a pre-existing history of mental distress or a disorder, not like depression, schizophrenia, or bipolar disorder, these can lower your the barrier to having psychosis as well. Even having a very traumatic event like losing a loved one or losing a job, these can all just increase your vulnerability. And for a lot of people, it includes young people like software engineers in San Francisco. When all of these vulnerabilities start to add up, you can find yourself in a sticky situation where your thinking is a little bit slowed, it's not processing correctly, and if AI gets in there, it can push you on the wrong path rather than the right path. Like a good therapist is trained to help you reality test and kind of come back to what is actually happening in the real world.
And so there seems to be a proliferation. You spoke about therapy of AI therapists. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Does that seem like we're using the tool that has the potential to push somebody with psychosis kind of to a greater level of psychosis? Are we using that same tool to try to help them? What are your thoughts on those?
Well, my thoughts, because I work in tech too, so I'm always thinking about how mental health and technology are creating new emergent properties. And what I think is that AI is neither a good tool nor a bad tool. It has very powerful capabilities of helping people. It's great at work. I love using it to write things. People use it really well to code. But when we're using it in an emotional capacity or we're using it to cope through something difficult, that's where the gray areas come in. And especially if we're talking about like general purpose models like ChatGPT, Claude, things that were not designed for mental health at the start. They're just not trained to help people and recognize when people are in a sticky situation, like a crisis, if they're having thoughts of wanting to hurt themselves, or they're having thoughts of selling their house. Like an AI chatbot should, if that's being used for therapy, should catch on, say like, hey, this person's in distress. I'm going to help them out, get them to a person who can help them. But that's just unfortunately not what they're built for. I do think that AI has a big role to play, though, because there's just not enough good therapists, not enough good doctors in mental health care. So it's understandable why people use it. I think there's a lot of room to use AI to make therapists 10 times better, make doctors 10 times better, and see more people. And it's going to require us to talk really carefully about how we use it to find those use cases where it actually shines and not hurts people.
Have you actually seen the conversation logs that led to AI psychosis? And if so, maybe from like broad strokes, walk us through what that interaction between the user and AI looked like.
Yeah. So great question. And what I've seen amongst the 12 patients that I took care of, as well as other high prominent cases in the news, what usually happens is that there is a level of isolation that occurs. So the person who is experiencing psychosis no longer has human beings in the loop with their thinking. They spend hours and hours and hours on the same chat log. With ChatGPT and Claude, there's a component of memory. If you're using the voice, you can forget that you've been talking to it for an hour, and like your context window is really, really long. And I don't know if you guys use AI a lot, but after like the first 3 prompts are amazing. Like it gives you what you want to hear. But after like 12, it's almost useless. And you have to start a new fresh chat because it just doesn't remember the things you said before. So with someone who's talking to an AI for hours and hours, what you see is just a devolving of the coherency of the responses that the chatbot is giving. There's a term called like AI hallucination. So that even the AI might start to just break down and start giving random emojis that make no sense. But to someone with psychosis, they might think it's really important. Oh, like this chatbot gave me this emoji. It must be a sign that I need to look out in the world to find that emoji in my life. So there's just kind of this ricocheting between thought patterns between a chatbot that is hallucinating and a person who's having delusions where they're no longer in the realm of reality and they've isolated themselves. And so that's kind of the state of where a family member can call and get that person to the hospital, or like the person just isn't taking care of themselves. So like the police has to bring them to the hospital for us to take care of them.
OpenAI has recently introduced a couple features that seem relevant to this conversation. So routing sensitive conversations to models that might be more adept at dealing with them, and then parental controls. Do you think that they're on the right track there, or are they missing the point? Is it something more fundamental? What are your thoughts there?
I think it's a good first step. It's definitely like that's ground zero. We need to make sure that people who need help, especially if they're in a crisis, they know how to get help. It's what happens when you go on YouTube or Google and you put in a shady question. I like to look back at history and the history of how technology interacts with society to learn lessons about how we can approach AI too. And in the same way where, we don't stop driving cars because we have car accidents. We develop new technologies like the seatbelt, like the airbag, so that when we use these technologies, we're safe. And then we also develop social rules. Like you don't drink and drive because that's a very dangerous situation you'll find yourself in. We can still enjoy that technology while also know how that tool works well and how it doesn't work well. And I think working with AI is very similar. Like we need to figure out like what are all the failure modes for these technologies and how can we protect who is most at vulnerable. And part of that conversation is, yes, putting red flags, safeguards in place, but also thinking about how are we building these models? Can they be more sophisticated in getting the person the right type of care at the right time?
As a parent myself, this is like AI companionship is something I think about quite a bit. So 2 questions. First, are the younger population, specifically teenagers, more vulnerable to being influenced by artificial intelligence, whether or not it's psychosis or not?
It's a good question, Matt. And I could only be talking from first principles when I'm answering that question because we just don't have research and data to show that people are at harm. My intuition says probably because we look back at social media and this is the specific group of people that were more likely to be anxious, more likely to be depressed. And when you're growing, like let's say you're, between the ages of 10 and 21, your frontal cortex, the front part of your brain, the brain CEO, is growing. It's building new connections. And that is a very pivotal point in all of our lives. Like we are developing how we see the world, how we cope, how we learn. And it's a very influential part of your life. So I imagine if someone is then going to an AI chatbot to get all of their social connection, all of their social skill building from something that just inherently is not conscious, I worry that that sets them up for at least a lack of skills in how to navigate like social interactions. And then you could also argue that there is like an addictive component of being online terminally and not being able to, spend time with your friends and build real life connections.
Yeah, I'm online terminally.
Me too.
I'm gonna have to think about that a little bit now. Okay, I want to just continue down the path on AI companionship. I interviewed Reid Hoffman last week, and one of my questions was about AI companionship, and I was pretty negative towards the concept in general, given global population decline, loneliness epidemic. It just seems like it's disconnecting us further from other humans. But somebody left a comment on that video that really stuck with me. They said, "Well, Matt, you're really fortunate that you have these close connections with family, that you have connections with friends, and you can get out of the house and meet new people. But how about AI companionship for the elderly who physically cannot leave the house, for example?" And so it really got me thinking, like, where do you fall on the spectrum of AI companionship? Is it super helpful? Is it potentially long-term detrimental? And yeah, what are your overall thoughts?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I am impressed by that commenter's insight because it's a really big question that we should all be asking ourselves. In mental health, I think about this problem all the time, which is that it's hard to put a big fat label over millions of people and say like this is good, this is bad. Reality is not that clean. And the truth is that there are a lot of people without means, without access to certain tools that other people have access to. That includes the elderly who are literally being abandoned in adult homes. And at times, like they have no connection to their families, no connection to even the nurses sometimes. So I think there is a role that AI could play. My guess would be that we should really think about what we're doing with it though. Like, are we using this AI to help build their memory, like help them retain some of those reps of using their brain in a certain way so that they can remember their family members? Are we using it to get them to feel comfortable enough where they don't have difficulties moving to a new environment? My worries occur when you have a technology that is antisocial, which is it further disconnects you from the people in your life that are important, your friends, your family, your work. That is where we see all of the downstream consequences of technology in my field of work. When technology is used pro-socially, that can be amazing. Like you can actually create something where people have better skills, have better connections. And if technology were to be deployed in that way, I think that would be a really nice middle ground to actually help people, because you're right. We're not doing a good job taking care of people with their mental health and our elderly. There still needs to be done. And I don't blame people for going to ChatGPT because it is lonely out there. They do need this need, which is to get validation. Maybe we can build something that's better than ChatGPT though.
Yeah, because of the pace of all of this, like AI certainly doesn't show signs of slowing down. It's really hard for people to stay informed on best practices and what resources are out there. Like, do you have any just common sense, practical tips for individuals, for parents, when, what things to be on the lookout for, or even resources that you would guide them to? Yeah.
Yeah. I would say not too different from social media. Like you said, I'm on X. That place can be a source of good dopamine and bad dopamine, and it really requires you to be very conscious of how your habits are developing sometimes when you're on social media. I think in a similar way with AI, if you notice that your level of immersion into that thing that you're using is increasing over time, if you're getting irritated because you can't access it, or you're offloading your thinking, what you do to connect with people, your emotional processing onto something that is outside of yourself. Those are kind of all things to kind of think about. Like, do I really want to use this technology to do all of my thinking, of all of my emotional processing? If you find that your family member is just becoming more isolated or having different thoughts, changing thoughts, then I think like these are all kind of red flags that, hey, the technology is doing more harm than good.
And you had mentioned earlier there's not a clinical definition yet of AI psychosis. The APA, American Psychiatric Association, recognizes gaming disorder, though.
Hmm.
How do you expect psychiatry to react to AI-related psychosis and addictions, and what is the timeline for that?
Well, one thing that frustrates me with mental health is we're so slow. Like even today, we're figuring out what happened in 2012 or when the iPhone came out, or 28 when the iPhone came out and social media was just much more prevalent. So it takes us a long time to figure out, hey, what happened, and then what are we going to do about it? Um, so my worry is that we're too slow, and we're going to learn about the consequences first before we figure out like what is actually happening. And like gaming disorder, which is a specific context of use around your addictive circuits in your brain, which we do know a lot about, it is going to require us to think about, what is this person using this technology for? What is going on in their brain? Are they getting like a dopamine hit? Are they getting oxytocin because they're falling in love with this thing? Can you connect that neurobiology, that pathway, to what you're seeing, so that we can get them the right treatment at the right time? I think it's going to require a lot of people to think very carefully about that. So, when we say AI psychosis, that could mean so many different things. Like someone might be having legit psychosis because they have schizophrenia, or they did a lot of stimulants, or they could be really, really lonely. They're finding connection with that chatbot, and the chatbot is influencing them in a way where they lose touch with reality. Those are two different pathways, and we treat those things differently. So it's going to require us to really look at exactly what is happening.
Okay. And what are the appropriate uses of AI in the psychiatric industry? How are you using it day to day, and how are you seeing folks in your field use it?
So I work in San Francisco, which means my population of people tend to be younger. A lot of them are, related to the tech industry, even engineers themselves. And so, adults are going to be adults, and adults are going to do what they want to do. And a lot of people are already using AI. So what I try to consult people on is not necessarily to stop using it, but just be very mindful about how you're using it. Just like when you um, open your phone, like you use certain applications for reasons, and if it's causing you issues, then you stop using that thing because it's not useful for you. I think in a similar way, know what you're using, know where ChatGPT works great, know when it goes wrong, and then also, I think that on our end, on the mental health end, we need to do all of our homework in figuring out like who is vulnerable to this, and can we consult you before bad things happen? And then how do we treat this? Like, how do we help someone who's already started down this path of psychosis, and then help them get well on the path to recovery? I think there's going to be a lot of work for us to do there. And in my world, I also work in technology. So how do we develop safeguards around all of these things?
And speaking of safeguards, have you started thinking about industry standards? Does there need to be industry standards for, I guess, AI companies, inference providers having certain protections for their users? Have you thought about that at all?
I think the common sense answer is probably yes. Um, Now, do the companies want to do that? I think they kind of do, because this is a headache to building a good product. At the same time, it is also moving resources away from competing, like with Google and with ChatGPT. So my hope is that we create a better understanding of what is actually happening in the world, because we really don't know how prevalent AI or any psychosis related to technology is right now. We don't know how many people are using chatbots for emotional companionship. Can we start collecting this data and then saying like, hey, this is where we draw the line? Like, you cannot uh, have you cannot promote your product in a way that is deceiving to the person and causes harm in this way. I think that we can all agree on some level of baseline risk. And this is with all technologies that we use anyways, with the cars, with TVs, how we promote things. We have standards. And I think that we should maybe find a good line where we all agree, hey, this is where you don't cross, build a good product, And then hopefully we can create alternatives for people who are lonely. They can use a better AI chatbot, or they can use something that gets them connected to the therapist that they're looking for.
Well, first of all, wanted to thank you for the work you're doing. Like, this topic can get heavy at times, obviously, but super important. If we were to fast forward a couple of years out, like, what would the ideal state be for you? Like, how do you know that we're approaching this in the right way and we've been successful with that approach?
It's a good question. And I'm like also looking at your chat feed here and hearing lots of cool things. Like, sometimes when you use chatbots too much, you can feel dumber. And that's because you're offloading cognitive abilities onto something that is not getting hardwired through neuroplasticity in your brain. Like, you want to use your brain in the same way you use your muscles. So you're building strength, you're building quick processing. When you have someone do your thinking for you, you don't build that muscle. So I would hope that we all learn how to optimize ourselves well, know what it takes to have really good well-being. Maybe AI plays a role in that. It helps you reflect on what your goals are, breaks down your milestones, and then also helps you prioritize your mental wellness at the same time. It gives you insights when you're maybe more irritable and vulnerable to having more anxiety or something like that. I think that if we get more insights, we learn to optimize how we're living, and we all are a little bit more happier because of that technology. I think we're heading in the right direction. We don't have, news headlines of people having AI psychosis. I think that would be a future I want to live in. And I also just want to live in a future where if someone needs a therapist or they actually need help, they actually get that help. And I think that that is always in the background when we're talking about this. So hopefully we can fix that problem too.
Awesome. Well, how can we help? Where can people find the work that you're doing? What's the best way to connect with you, etc.?
Yeah, I think you guys are doing such a great job tending to your community and making these important things known. So I really appreciate even being here with you two, Matt and Nick. You can find me on X, which is my name, so Keith Sakata, or on LinkedIn, which is also my name, Keith Sakata. And if you have questions, I'm pretty active on those platforms, so I can also answer some of those things as well.
Cool. We just dropped both of those links in chat. If you want to follow Keith Sakata, please do. Thank you, Dr. Sakata. Thank you so much for your time. I am following you. I want to read everything you post about AI companionship, AI and mental health. So I echo the same sentiment as Nick. Thank you for your work.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
All right. Well, this is a awesome topics for today, huh?
This has been a lot of fun, very insightful. I want to keep it going. Do we have any more guests?
That's it for today. We'll, as mentioned, we will be in San Francisco next week. We're going to be doing our live show from BoxWorks directly. We have some awesome guests. I believe it's going to be Thursday instead of Friday. We may also do it Friday. I think we're actually going to do 2 shows next week. So be sure to follow us on all the platforms, and we'll see you next week. Nick, thanks for joining me today. Thanks to all our